Hello, and welcome to Law Talk Friday from Lone Star Legal Aid. My name is Susan Soto. I'm a staff attorney at Lone Star Legal Aid's Conroe Branch office. And today, we're going to provide you with an update on public education. My guests today are Dr. Audrey Young, State Board of Education member from District 8, and Docs Gonzalez from the Texas Association of School Boards. And as a reminder, before we get started today, this presentation is intended to serve as legal information and does not replace legal advice. Contact Lone Star Legal Aid at 1-800-733-8394 or go to www.lonestarlegal.org for more information on legal assistance. Lone Star Legal Aid does not discriminate on the basis of race, color, religion, gender, gender expression, sexual orientation, age, national origin, ancestry, disability, marital status, or military status in any of its activities or operations. Dr. Young, why don't we start with you? Thank you for being here today. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you for having me here today. I am Dr. Audrey Young, and I represent the State Board of Education in District 8, which is the East Texas area. And my day job is the Director of Student Support Services for Nacogdoches ISD. I just finished my 28th year in public education.
Great, we're so happy to have you. Docs, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role?
Sure. So I am the Division Director of TASB Governmental Relations. And so our job is to help communicate stuff that happens at the legislature out to our members, which are school boards across the state, and then help them communicate back to their legislators. Been doing it now for about 15 years. So it's been a fun ride. And Audrey was a school board member before being on State Board of Education. And that's how we became such great, fantastic friends, is when she was a tremendous school board member. I was really sad to see her go to the SBOE, but she's been a tremendous SBOE member also. So it's been a lot of fun.
Quite a compliment from a colleague and a constituent. So thank you both. Thank you both for being here today. Dr. Young, our viewers today might be wondering, what exactly is the State Board of Education? Because in school districts, there are also school district boards of trustees. So can you tell us, what is SBOE?
The State Board of Education is an elected body. It is partisan. 15 members of the state board. We each represent a certain geographic area of the state, and we have about 1.9 million constituents apiece. So we represent as a whole the entire state of Texas. It is based on, our public education system, which includes charters, because those are also part of the public system. And it is similar to the local school boards in the fact that we function as a team. We're not individual. We do have to have a majority vote. And we follow Robert's Rules of Order, and we have agendas and a lot of the same things that your local board does. We function in the same way.
Don't forget your favorite part, public comment.
Public comment is my absolute favorite part.
And so,
which is an opportunity at the local level also. So tell me what the differences are between the State Board of Education and our local boards.
The State Board of Education, its main charge is over the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, which are the core teaching values, or the core elements that are taught across the state for all the students. And so we oversee that element. We also oversee our funding, the funding for the education for the state of Texas. We oversee graduation requirements, and we oversee some school board trainings for our local boards. And a large portion is also for the curriculum materials that are adopted across the state as well.
When would it be appropriate for a parent to contact their state Board of Education representative rather than a local board member?
If a parent has an issue, if a constituent has an issue that has been unresolved at the local level, that's when it would be a good time to contact your state Board of Education member.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like if you had an issue with something that was in a specific classroom or something, you might talk to your local folks. If you have a problem with the standards across the state, then you would talk to the state board. I will add, because you talked about school funding, Audrey, for people that are concerned about the level of school funding, don't call Audrey, because she wants as much funding that can be diverted to public education as it can, but that's established by the legislature, determines the overall funding levels, and then the SBOE, much like a local school board, oversees kind of like the formulas of how, like the way that it's implemented, like the ADA and all that individual stuff that the commissioner is responsible for getting that money out to school districts. And so the SBOE helps to help the commissioner work on that.
Well, before we turn to more specific information from you, docs, if they have concerns about levels of funding, parents should not contact SBOE. I know the answer, but please tell our viewers, who should they contact?
Is that for you, docs?
I think, oh, why don't you take it? Well, I'll take it. I don't want to get Audrey in trouble. You call your local legislators. That's who you would call. You can certainly call Audrey, and she would empathize. But your local legislators are the ones who make the decisions on how much the state will appropriate for education purposes across different sectors. So, so that is who you would talk to. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that tip. And Audrey, before we move on to our next segment, what is the State Board of Education doing during the summer? School's not in session.
We're super busy, actually. State Board meets next week, and on our agenda is the commissioners' the recommendations for charters. We're also looking at social studies. And we are looking at teacher certification program, Ed TPA, and the consideration of that pilot program. So we just continue to crank it out all year long. Just because it's summer doesn't mean we stop.
Well, we sure do appreciate your service to the children of Texas. So thank you for that. Docs, let's move on to your role. Would you tell us a little bit about what you do? And then I have some follow-up questions for you.
Sure. So our primary goal here at TASB Government Relations is to help school boards across the state, because every school board is a member of TASB, to develop an advocacy agenda that they come up with, and then we help to accomplish that agenda at the legislature and at the state board and other regulatory agencies. So it's a fun job, because I always say I have 7,700 bosses out across the state, and we listen to that. We take their cues for what we need to do out there. So whether that's through newsletters or advocacy or action alerts to our members, we try to get them involved to reach out to their members to accomplish those legislative goals. Now, that's just my department. TASB has a whole bunch of other stuff going on that is very beneficial to districts, but we don't have enough time for that.
That's a whole nother show.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and just like the State Board of Education is working behind the scenes during the summer when school is out, the Texas legislature is also working, even though it's not a legislative year, to meet in Austin. And I understand that recently you got some information from some recent hearings. Would you tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. Usually the interim is a little quieter on the legislative front. But you may recall we actually even had special sessions all last year that kind of took us through a lot of the post-legislative session interim that is kind of usually not as busy. But yes, recently, last week, a couple of weeks ago, we had a couple of hearings, one in the Senate, one in the House, with the respective education committees. And part of it was to get an update from the commissioner on just the Commissioner of Education, Mike Morath, on the state of public education right now, and then get updates on recent legislation that's been passed by the legislature to see how it's being implemented. And as Audrey knows, once they pass a bill, a lot of that legislation has to be turned into actual law. And so you have to have rules that are created around it and to implement all of that law. So if the statute is kind of a broad framework, the rules help people understand exactly what needs to be done to comply with that law. And that rules process, that rulemaking process, takes quite a while. And some of those rules go before the State Board of Education when they're deliberating kind of how the finer points of those rules are going to come out. So so some of those laws are still pending, but the commissioner gave an update on kind of where some of those are. Really important to note, something that the commissioner discussed was the teacher shortage issue that is happening right now across the state. We saw right as the pandemic was starting, actually a decline in teacher attrition. I think people were really hesitant to leave where they were because there was so much uncertainty around the economy and what was going to happen. So a lot of people were staying put. But about a year after or a year maybe into the pandemic, in 21-22, we saw a huge spike in attrition. I think it's up to about 12% now of teachers are turning over. And the vast majority of those are your beginning teachers, your first year teachers that are coming in and just either not prepared mentally or professionally for the job, because it's a tough one. And as the commissioner was noting, the bulk of teachers coming in now are coming in through alternate certification programs, not through your traditional programs. So, and not to say that all those programs are bad or anything, but it's just a different track. Sometimes they're shorter, sometimes, whatever the reasons. But he just noted that the bulk of them are coming in from that avenue, and then interns coming in that are helping. So the amount of like kind of standard certification or postgraduate type folks coming in is a very small component of teachers coming in. And that's a problem because it's been shown through data that most teachers, the longer your tenure, the more effective you are at teaching. And as we've seen really steep declines in academic performance across the board due to the pandemic, and that was another issue that they talked about, it's more important than ever to make sure that you have a highly qualified teacher for those kids that really need them. So, and ideally, you'd like to have them in every single classroom, right, Audrey? You'd like to have a highly qualified student in every single classroom. And I think the things are just that there aren't enough of those teachers out there, and there aren't enough teachers, period. And this year, but this year, we saw attrition match the number of new teachers for the year. So there was like 40-something thousand new teachers and 40-something thousand teachers who left or resigned or whatever. So that's a zero-sum game that we cannot afford to maintain. So legislators, school leaders, everyone is very concerned about, they are very concerned about finding ways to increase the teacher pool, to get more people interested in going into the teaching profession. But it's tough. It's a tough job. And, even if a lot of that is past the session, it's going to take years for that pipeline to really start bearing fruit. And so we've got to find ways to help our current teachers, I think, really kind of make it more comfortable for them. I don't know how to say that, Audrey. We need to help them as much as we can in their current position so that they don't leave.
Well, I definitely think that we need to make teachers feel valued. It's definitely, I know one of the things that we're looking at is the product that's being produced from the alt-cert programs as well as the university programs. And you can produce a great product, but the workplace element is also what makes or breaks the situation. And so we definitely have to ensure that the classrooms are everybody's healthy, wealthy, and wise. We want to make sure that teachers feel valued, they feel respected, they feel like they're in a safe environment, and that the efforts that they're making to educate the children are that they'll see the positive end of that. Sometimes that's not always the case, and you feel that way sometimes when you look at your paycheck. Or you feel that way sometimes when you realize it's 6 o'clock at night and you're still in your classroom grading papers. And so all of those things have to be taken into account when we talk about how to improve the teacher workforce as a whole.
And a big part of it is also pay. And I'll tell you, I've never heard a school board member say, I want to pay my teachers less. It's like an arms race out there to see who can pay teachers the most, but teacher salaries usually account for about 50% of a school district budget. And that takes into account the lights and a lot of other things that go in, materials. You have a bunch of other staff that you need to pay, your bus drivers, your food service folks, your paraprofessionals, all that. You have a bunch of people that you also need to run a school. And you might often hear, well, if we didn't pay so much on extracurricular activities in Texas, or we didn't pay so much for administration, those, districts spend about 3% on their across the state, about 3% of their budgets on central admin and 3% on their extracurricular activities, across all their extracurricular activities. So that's 6% total. The bulk are your people. It's, like I said, 50% to teachers. It's about 85% to staff, generally speaking. That's where the money's going to people. The education is a people-driven business. So, I know sometimes we sound like a broken record, trying to get more funding to pay for teachers, but that's a lot of times what it comes down to is just being able to afford not only their salaries, but their benefits, and making sure that they can afford healthcare, because healthcare for teachers is a whole nother subject and something that is hard for them to afford sometimes. So a multi-layered issue there.
It is, but it's encouraging to know that it's on the radar of not only the Commissioner of Education, but the legislature, to at least start thinking about ways to solve that teacher shortage here in Texas. Mm-hmm. And what about remediation efforts for students? Many parents are concerned, as are teachers, that during COVID, children lost some ground that they might have gained. So what's on the radar about that?
Well, the commissioner showed some very sobering news about academic performance over the past couple of years. Now, we have to take into account the kids taking STAR exams this year might not be the same kids that were taking them last year, might not be the same kids that were taking them the year before. STAR exams were a very optional endeavor for a lot of kids across the state. I even wrestled with that prospect with my kids, but I eventually had to go take it because they could probably use a practice. But anyway, math especially saw a significant decrease in academic achievement. There was a double-digit loss. I think it was about, I have it over here somewhere. I want to say it was like maybe a 15% drop for some kids in math. I'm not going to bother looking because I can't find it anymore. Anyway, but reading also, you saw drops across the board for kids in reading, but not as bad as math. And as one would expect, for kids that were economically disadvantaged, their scores dropped a lot more than those kids that were not. So schools are working very hard to address those needs. They've been aware of these needs for years. It's a very tough job to get some of those kids up to passing levels. And so because there's just so much stuff outside of academics that's happening for them. And as Audrey knows, sometimes school is actually the safest and most stable place for them. And you've got to try to get them to talk about algebra and learn algebra. So it is tough, but yes, so big drops. So there's a lot of things that they're trying to do. There was a lot of stimulus money that the federal government sent down to Texas that was given directly to schools. Most of it was to help catch kids back up. And a lot of districts were using that money to pay for remediation programs. There was a law passed, House Bill 4545, that required districts to provide accelerated instruction to kids who did not meet state standards on state tests. Unfortunately, that test is that bill, that language is very specific, and it requires some very tricky staffing ratios for kids that are in these tutoring programs. And it's like 3 to 1, like you can't have more than 3 kids to 1 teacher. And while that might be ideal for some situations, it's not really ideal for all situations. And that's a very costly endeavor for schools. So they're trying to do that, and they're able to do it. A lot of them are able to do it with stimulus funds now, but those funds have now dried up. They will not be around going forward. And so that money will either have to be provided by the state or diverted from other programs in local school districts. So it's, and school districts have already done remediation programs. I don't want to sound like that they didn't do it before this law. They always did it. This is just a very prescriptive way that they have to do it. And that law, parts of it will remain through the drying up of federal stimulus dollars that came in during the pandemic.
So those emergency stimulus funds that he's talking about, the specific, they're called ESSER funds, which is the Elementary and Secondaries School Emergency Relief Grant. And it was millions of dollars across the state, and districts received different amounts depending on what they needed or what was calculated based on a formula.
Title I enrollment, I believe is what it was. Yeah.
And Title I enrollment.
Mm-hmm.
So in particular, Nacogdoches ISD received $35 million. Those funds are for 3 years, and they have been utilized to hire additional staff to provide tutoring and assistance in the classroom and different elements that support our students and their needs. In that, yes, interventions were happening prior to, but this allowed interventions to become a very serious and intentional for the school systems. Most of the school systems built the intervention time within their master schedule or extended school after school, or provided tutoring after school hours, and some even on Saturdays. And so the House Bill 4545 required school districts to add in an additional 30 hours of education a year per student, and required that every student who did not pass the STAR test have an accelerated learning plan, an ALP, created that specifically designed what it was the goals and objectives of what the student is working on. And when Doc's talked about what's going to stay around, that's one of those elements that'll stick around after the funding is gone. And so I can tell you that in the special education world, we already had that. It was called we had IPIs. And so those plans are very much like ALPs, but we already had that in place, and we were doing that years before the accelerated learning plans came in. So it is a good plan. It makes school districts look very specifically at their students and their students' individual and personal growth, and really focuses on what the individual student needs. So that was intentional. I hope that, in the next legislative session, they take a look at House Bill 4545, figure out what's going to stick around and how they can continue to support it in the school systems.
Which brings me to my next line of questions. What is coming on the horizon? Looking forward a little bit, what should people who are interested in Texas public education be watching for on the horizon?
Yeah, I always say that whatever forecast I always make, it takes, in 2 weeks, it'll be completely changed. And I think we all saw that recently with the events in Uvalde, that what we thought was going to be the focus this next session may not very well be the focus anymore. And while I don't think it will take up all the air in the room, I think that there will be a good deal of attention paid to making sure that districts are complying with current requirements for their safe and secure schools, that they're getting their security audits into they're required to get security audits done and turned into the Texas School Safety Center. And I was talking to one of our security people here, and they're saying that while districts have done a lot of those, they haven't necessarily gone through all the processes yet that they need to with the School Safety Center. They haven't all been reviewed and all that other stuff. So there's still a big lag time behind that. She did note that most districts are doing a very good job in terms of their procedures and the plans they have in place. But you can never plan for everything is really what it is. And so that's going to take a considerable amount of attention. I think this session is there anything else that we can do to make sure that our schools are safe? And really, there's only so much that schools can do, right? They can help. You can only lock down your school so much, and before they start looking more like prisons. But that will be part of it. They will look at the teacher shortage situation. That's something that I don't think they can afford to delay anymore. Although the solutions, I don't know what more they can. I think easing the burden of some of the current requirements. There are these reading academies that I hear that are discussed a lot right now, and they're intended to help teachers who provide reading instruction to certain kids develop the right tools to be highly qualified teachers. And that is a very worthy goal. But the practical way of getting them to that point is proven to be really burdensome for teachers who are already taxed with a lot of other responsibilities and time commitments that they have. So there's this, the scales are a little off right now in the amount of time that they're spending trying to prepare for this training, but at the same time trying to maintain their other duties that they need to get done. I don't know, what else, Audrey? What else?
So on the note of the reading academies, TEA has heard the teacher's voice in that and has worked through shoring up some of the extended time that it takes to participate in that reading academy. School districts are also providing a larger incentive for completing that. The incentive in that is somewhere between $1,500 and $5,000 for finishing that certification. I myself participated in the Reading Academy program and found that the times that were prescribed for each one of the modules was slightly inaccurate by about twice as much time as what it actually said it would take to get done. And so as a district administrator, I could figure out if I needed to, how to carve some time out of my day to get that done. But if I was a classroom teacher trying to do that, you can't just shut the door and ignore the kids. You actually have to teach all day long and then go home or start on your planning period or after school and work on what was supposed to be a 2-hour module that actually ended up being a 4-hour module. So those are some of the things that have been heard by TEA. And so they have the programs that they're sending out this summer are actually more focused and have they're not easier by any means at all. It's just that they're a little more accessible in that sense. And so we hope to have the remainder of teachers accomplish that in this next school year, because this is year 3 of the Reading Academy programs. It is an excellent program. It's quality information. I think it's real important. We have a whole group of teachers that we have now that were raised through whole language. One of the elements that the state of Texas adopted 20 some years ago. And now we have those teachers who technically weren't raised in phonics, now having to learn what phonics is about and then teach it as well. So I really think that it's a positive move in the right direction for all of our teachers and our students across the state of Texas to improve literacy as a whole. But it is a large burden on the school districts as well as the classroom teachers who are trying to get through that program.
Yeah,
Anything else on, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Doc.
Oh yeah, and yeah, it's and they will be looking again at how to catch kids up from the pandemic and get them back up to speed. But the teacher shortage issue goes hand in hand with that, I think. And I guess another thing is just growth. While across the state, we're actually not seeing the growth that we traditionally see in student enrollment. But there are some schools that are seeing very rapid growth, and their ability to build new buildings is actually really hindered by, a school they can't build a building without passing a bond, a big building. And so that bond has to go before the electorate to be passed. And we've seen a pretty steep drop in the approval ratings of bonds from, just a few years ago, from about the 76% down to about 50%. So part of that is, I think, and this is just speculation, during the pandemic, we talked about the economic uncertainty of the pandemic, and right now, certainly there's a lot of economic uncertainty around just the cost of goods and services. People, when you pass a bond, it might result in a higher tax bill. It may not, depending on what a district does with its tax rate and their ability to sometimes they use a bond to pay down other debt faster. And then it's kind of like a zero sum game on the tax rate side. The tax appraisal side, which districts have no control over, is a whole different story. And, this tax rate can stay the same, but if appraisals are going up, your tax bills are going to be bigger. But anyway, that rising tax bill, because tax appraisals have generally gone up in Texas over the past few years, I think is causing a lot of people to also have a lot of anxiety about passing a bond that they feel will raise their taxes even more. So I think that, coupled with there's actually language in the ballot now that all districts have to put that says this is a tax increase, even if it's not, even if it's a tax rate neutral measure, or even if appraisals go down and the tax bill drops, it's just now in state law that they have to put that language on there. I think there's a lot of little things that are leading to the overall failure of more bonds. And what that means is that you have a bunch of kids being crammed into portables, and they don't, like, there's some schools that are seeing really rapid growth in pockets around the state, and it's hard to put them somewhere. And ISDs, unlike any other school, like if the kid comes to the door, you have to take that kid. You can't say we're full, and that's something that really, I think ISDs are very proud of the fact that they serve all kids, but it becomes a challenge for some when you have to actually find a desk and and put them somewhere. So
right, the practicalities of that.
And even more so when those students are high needs, special needs, or socioeconomically disadvantaged, because that draws on even more resources from your school district.
Yeah, and we need to bear in mind, about, is it like 60-something% now of kids in Texas are economically disadvantaged, I believe. So I mean, the majority of kids require more resources to help them get up to speed. So it is a significant challenge, and that number is not trending down. That number, that 62%, has just only trended up, and I think will continue to trend up.
So Dr. Young, what's on the future agenda for State Board of Education? What should parents watch for from your view?
So we are working on updating the TEKS for social studies, and we are also moving into CTE. That is kind of hit and miss, intertwined in between all of the TEKS updating.
And what does that mean for people who don't know that acronym?
The Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills.
And CTE is Career and Technology Education?
That is correct. Thank
Got it.
you.
All right,
And
thanks.
TEKS are just the curriculum the state curriculum standards. That's
Right.
it's a fancy word for state curriculum standards. Yeah.
Right. So those are the big things that we're working on the remainder of this year, and then we'll move into the next area. Proclamation 2024, I believe, will be next, or 2023 will be next, which tells us which standards that we will work on next.
Sounds
always
great.
something.
There's lots. Sorry?
I said there's always something that we're
Sure.
working on.
There's lots on the horizon. And I think for our audience members who perhaps are not as familiar with educational issues and school law like the three of us are, Docs, we'll start with you. Some of the topics that you were discussing, where can our viewers get more information?
Oh gosh. That's a good question. For our members, we have a newsletter that we send out. I don't know for the general public, there are plenty of resources on tasb.org that they can go to learn more about a lot of these issues. But the best place is just reading your local newspaper. They all do pretty good jobs of covering the bigger education issues that are happening around the state. The teacher shortage issue I see stories in that all the time. And locally, you will find stories about bonds and growth and ways to accommodate all those kids. So yeah, pick up the local paper.
Good advice. Dr. Young, where can our viewers get more information about the topics you touched on today?
Well, I always encourage people to look at their local school district first, and however they communicate, which might be through their website or a newspaper articles. Also, then you want to look at your education service centers. Those are also valuable places of information that provide parent training and parent resources, and as well as district trainings. So your education resource center for your district that your district participates in is an excellent place. And then of course the TEA website, the Texas Education Agency website, has all kinds of information, and each one of those areas that are covered under the Texas Education Association has their contact information at the bottom, as well as the specific department or person that's in charge of that faction of TEA.
That's fantastic. I would like to thank both of you for taking time out of your day today to share some summer updates about educational issues in our state. As a former Texas public school teacher and principal myself, I thought today's information was absolutely ever so helpful, and I thank you both. This is
Thanks for having
staff
us.
attorney. Thank you. Staff attorney Susan Soto from Lone Star Legal Aid signing off for Law Talk Friday.